Hi, I'm Nat,
And I'm Guy.
and we're exhausted.
We were out all day. We went to the protest that turned into riots. We left a bit early, so we got to miss a lot of the violence, but we went to what was supposed to be the CPAC event after that. They had a new name for it. What was it?
It was Cumbre Viva Mexico.
A lot of good speakers, a lot of nice people there, but I will say Eduardo, say his name.
Eduardo Verástegui.
Absolutely shit the bed. He was set up for a slam dunk and he missed the layup. Okay, let's get into the protest first. We do have some clips and stuff as well.
Yes, the main and only story for right now is the protest because they are going global. A lot of people are reporting on it, and they're reporting on it from a lens where they're not in Mexico. We are in Mexico City. We actually went. We captured some footage of the peaceful protest and march that was there, that then ended with them going to the Palacio Nacional, which is essentially Mexico's White House, and they started tearing down the barricades, and it became and evolved into the anger of the people.
Yeah, it was very strange because we went on the march. So most of these protests in Mexico City start at the Angel of Independence, and it's about a 45-minute walk to the big square. We made it almost to the big square, but then we had to be at the other CPAC event, so we kind of went
Cumbre
back.
Viva Mexico, not CPAC.
But it was very peaceful. There was nobody was really rowdy. We had been to a feminist march before, and there were people with hammers, a lot of black bloc people. I guess all the agitators must have been at the square because I honestly didn't see virtually no agitators along the way.
Well, there were some patches here and there of people dressed all in black with masks on their face, hiding their identities. But during the march, most people were wearing white, and it was very clearly more of a family, young people oriented event, and then it devolved into chaos. We were actually not even able to enter the Zócalo at that time because a lot of people were heading there, and then they dispersed out because the government of Mexico did put up a lot of blockades, cement blockades and metal blockades, not just protecting the Palacio Nacional or essentially the White House of Mexico, but also all around the streets that lead into that big plaza that is called the Zócalo.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking what I was seeing on my ex, because when we were actually there, none of that stuff was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then we were at the other event and we started seeing how it evolved into the riots and the anger of the people. Yes, probably some were provoked and some were agitators. Maybe when the government has done this before, where they put agitators to go into these protests and start chaos and start riling people up, and then that devolves into violence. But let's see what CNN says. Not to trust CNN, but to see what mainstream news is saying. Thousands protest crime and corruption in Mexico City as Gen Z protests gain momentum. And yes, this was billed as a Gen Z march, or a march of young people who are completely appalled and fed up with how not just this current government, but all governments have handled cartels and the narco-terrorism, as they say, that has infected Mexico for so long.
yeah, and I would say it was kind of a protest of all ages. A lot of the other protests we went to were a lot of older people. Mm-hmm. This one wasn't necessarily a bunch of young people or old people, but it was just a mix of everybody. There was actually a lot of families there, but if anybody's watching the X and the clips that are coming in, we'll show some of them. Yes. It didn't look like it was a lot of families, but on the march there, before everybody got to the town square, I think a lot of people are realizing a lot of protests in Mexico City do get violent in the town square. So they'll do the entire march, which is about 45 minutes to an hour, and then they just won't go to the town square where it usually ends.
Mm-hmm. So let's see what they're saying is happening, and then we will color in what they miss. A few thousand people, more than a few thousand people, took to the streets of Mexico City on Saturday to protest growing crime, corruption, and impunity in a protest organized by members of Generation Z. We have also spoken about it is unclear who actually did organize the protest itself, but it gained momentum on social media and ended up becoming bigger and bigger, but which ended with strong backing from older supporters of opposition parties. Again, depends on how you want to look at it. Of course, some opposition parties will try to capitalize on it, but a lot of people were trying to make it clear, even people we interviewed. We will have an edited video about the protest coming out next week. They were making it clear that they were not there for any particular political party. They weren't affiliated to political parties, and they were just fed up with everybody and the system itself, which is infected with corruption since its inception about 200 years ago.
Yeah, I think we'll kind of get into the corruption and what's going on politically in a minute when we talk about the secondary event we went to. But for now, why don't we show some clips and things so that people actually get an idea if they haven't seen it yet?
Yes. So when we went, and these are all from today, unedited, just B-roll that we took for the edited video. But this is what we were looking at. This is what we saw.
Yeah, so I mean, it was pretty mellow, pretty mundane. There was some chanting. We did interview quite a few people. Most of the people we did interview were young, except there was one older woman that came up to us and wanted to speak to her, so we did.
And they were yelling narco government and narco president for Claudia Sheinbaum. And there were also people in horseback. A lot of these protests were sparked from the assassination of a local mayor in Uruapan, Michoacan, called Carlos Manso. So a lot of people did join because of that. But there was presence, even in Mexico City, of agricultural workers, farm workers, and also people from other states that came here to the main protest. But these protests were going on all over Mexico, not just Mexico City. And a lot of the states were also they devolved into riots.
And again, we will show the violent riots that happened at the end, but we weren't there for that part. So we're going to play other clips from X. But first, we want to kind of show you what happened when we were there. And it's kind of funny that civilians have horses here, because in Canada, it's the police trampling the protesters with horses usually.
And what the people are yelling there is to revoke the president with the lemon tits, because that's a nickname that people have for Claudia Sheinbaum. Here, people are absolutely fed up with Mexico and Morena, which is the governing party, the ruling party of Claudia Sheinbaum. And this is another point of view that we had.
Yeah, and as you can see, it's fairly sparse. I mean, there was quite a few people there. I would have estimated between maybe 5,000 and 7,000 people, maybe 10. But like we said, we had been to the feminist rally before that to kind of take video and report on that, and that was a much bigger protest than this was.
At least initially, and because it started.
And it was much more violent along the way, because along the way, the feminist protest was very violent, because there was a lot of people in Black Bloc just spray painting openly things, breaking buildings, breaking windows, having hammers. I seen none of that. It all happened at the town square, which we didn't quite make it to.
Yes, and there before they were chanting "Out with Claudia," which is Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico currently, and against whose the protests have been mostly directed towards, but the government in general as well. And last clip that we were able to take.
Oh, we got quite a few more, but we'll just play this one, and then we'll get into the X.
Yes, and I did want to mention, you will see a lot of people with these hats, and that is, or hats that look kind of Texan. That is because in Michoacan, the governor that got assassinated, that was one of his symbols. So the people are wearing it in honor of him and also marching in honor of him. He is not the only mayor that has been killed. And the Claudia Sheinbaum's government, there's been about 10 different mayors or political members of political parties assassinated. But again, most people are wearing white, they're wearing the hats, they're waving flags. It is pretty mild.
This was the most mild protest we had been to in Mexico City, to be honest. I even told you when we left, I think I said to her, I said, a lot of people must have stayed home, because it did have a lot of media attention that the Mexican government was getting ready for this. They were expecting it to be violent. It did get violent, but when we were there, it did not look like it was going to go in that direction whatsoever.
Yes. And ZZ Animal, thank you for being here, says, I'm glad that you stayed safe. And again, I guess we were lucky that we had that other event we wanted to go to and cover.
Oh, we were
well.
this close because we walked about 2 blocks from the town square. And I was telling her, like, let's just go there, make the intro for the video, and we can get a few more interviews. But we just decided not to because we were already running late for the other event.
Yeah, and it would have taken a long time to try to get in because that is where most of the streets had been blocked already by these giant cement blocks and by the metal things.
Barricades,
thank you.
It's been a long day because we were going since about 7 a.m. this morning.
Yes, and under the sun. But ZZ Animal also says, I say leave all animals out of protests, walk on foot or in car instead. And I do mostly agree with that. A lot of animals are not used to that. I also don't like seeing dogs out in the heat. But the horses were pretty well behaved, and I don't think they made it all the way down. It was just more of a show because, again, a lot of the states that are also protesting and where most of the violence, well, all of the violence, there's violence all over Mexico, but where a lot of the violence is happening, do have that tradition of horses and cattle ranchers, etc.
There was a ton of families and kids out there. And even when we went to the feminist march a few months ago, there was a ton of kids. And I was like, oh, this isn't appropriate because there was a lot of people with hammers. There was a lot of violence at that rally. At this one with the march, I thought this was a completely appropriate march for children and families, except I guess it turned extremely violent at the end. We missed it. Let's show some of those clips now.
Yes. And just last one, ZZ Animal says, looks like a summer parade, so well behaved, not a riot per se. But then it devolved into this. So this is the main town square. And from La Derecha Diario Mexico, it says video where Sheinbaum's police are brutally taking down a protester that was just peacefully there with a Mexican flag. So this is kind of how it started to happen. And a lot of these clips will not be completely in order.
This happens at the end. There's a huge town square in Mexico City.
Called the Zócalo.
All the marches typically last an hour. They wind up there, and very often they get violent in the town square. A lot of people avoid the very end of the march because they want to avoid the violence.
And the town square is, again, where the Palacio Nacional or the Mexican White House is. And that is where the president lives. She's not there right now, obviously.
Ven a ese señor que tiene la bandera de México.
And we're seeing,
No sé qué es lo que sucede.
look at this guy.
Pero de pronto alguien lo tira.
Suddenly someone knocks
Y
him
todos
over
los policías se avanzan contra él. No sé por qué.
and all police go against him. So that was completely unprovoked, but police clearly went at him unprovoked. And that is how...
And do you have better clips than this? Because there wasn't a lot of people here on this clip.
But I wanted to explain kind of how it happened. Hold on. So this is still, we see people in white. We see still peacefulness. But at the same time, there were people there ready to take action if needed. So Claudia was expecting this to get out of hand. And again, there are rumors that there were instigators amongst the crowd that started all of it. And there you see the tear gas starting to be spread out. But people there were just arriving. That was just after the protest kind of came through.
Honestly, like, I don't have a dog in the race. I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. had some agitators within the crowd making this violent. This puts
Sheinbaum herself.
This puts a lot more pressure on Maduro in Venezuela. They currently have Venezuela surrounded with the largest military force since the Iraq War. Maduro has to be seen what's happening in Mexico tonight. And if they are in the final stages of some kind of negotiation or him stepping down, this would have put a ton more pressure on him.
And the police and the behavior of the police as well. A lot of people are flabbergasted. Because that is a young kid.
Yeah, I mean, you've picked some very mild clips here.
Oh, I have a lot.
Oh, okay.
We're going to go through a lot of these. And how it started
there was
to
another
devolve.
clip where a female officer started getting trampled and beat,
we have
and we do. Okay, we'll wait for that. But the crowd kind of rescued her and pulled her out of there.
So Again, kids, young kids being sprayed and beaten by the Mexican police. And I will play after all of this the response from the president saying that none of this actually happened.
Okay, obviously all this happened, but I will say this. Everybody in Mexico knows if the protest is going to get violent, it's going to get violent in the town square. There's going to have to be some use of force to stop people from absolutely swarming the palace. So if you decide to be there at the end, you can kind of expect that somewhat. Not that I'm defending their actions in any way, shape, or form, but...
And there we see as more tear gas gets sprayed and people continue to try to get through. Those are the metal barricades that used to be in front of the palace that got completely taken down by the crowd.
And they're absolutely massive. You can see they're 2.5 times the size of a normal person.
But we can also see the difference in even what people are wearing, and most of the people that were wearing white and were just peacefully marching are not there as much. But I will say it is, I mean, there is a mix of, I think, agitators and also people that were genuinely there protesting since the beginning.
There was a lot, this was a really pre-planned. People knew this protest was coming up. Something similar happened in Vancouver, and agitators actually intentionally came to Vancouver and absolutely destroyed the city. So...
And here in Mexico, that happens quite often, also during the Feminist March, for example. But here, Anthony Cabasas says a female officer appears to be seriously injured and was dragged out to safety by a group of men ordering the crowd not to attack her as she is carried to safety. I have my own opinion about female officers, especially during riots or protests. I don't think they should be there.
No.
But because of this. And they're saying, bring her over here, bring her to safety, take her away. And they're saying, no, she's injured, leave her alone, let her move. And then at the end, they say, just so you see, Sheinbaum isn't going to take care of you. The people are the ones that take care of you. That's what they're telling the police officer. Yeah,
and I will say, if anybody, you can definitely have a sense now going into the next election in a few years, this is going to be a big issue. There's going to be a big contingent of people against the cartels, and that's how they're going to probably go after Morena or whoever kind of takes over for Morena. Which politician is most likely to benefit from that? I would say Lily Tejas by far has the most to benefit from this. Her clips are all over. She didn't give a new interview. I thought she did. They're just posting her old clips because she's the only real politician to speak out very, very, very harshly on this stuff.
Yes, Lily Tejas is a member of the House, and she has been pretty open with speaking about the U.S. coming into Mexico, helping with the narco state issue, but a lot of people in Mexico also are worried of bringing the U.S. in fully.
Well, yeah, you can if you get rid of the cartels, you're going to need the help of the U.S. and the U.S. is pretty much going to take on that role. So, and the U.S. is very corrupt in itself. So, especially if they want to get control over Mexico, I don't know if you're going to trade one bad situation for another.
And ZZ Animal says, are they paid by instigators and rioters like here in the U.S.? Yes. However, this next clip and what a lot of people are saying is that a lot of the people that were actually trying to take down the barricades, trying to go towards the palace, were not wearing black bloc. They were not wearing anything to shield their faces.
Yeah, and
maybe just gas masks eventually, but it was a mix.
And it's a mix of political ideologies here, too. This wasn't a conservative rally, although that's what the president wanted to pin it as. There's a lot of leftist political movements here that are even further left than the president that are against her. So this is a mix of right and left, just kind of protesting and probably wanting violence for their own political means.
So here we see again. This is when people are getting into the city square, initially mostly. And they started spraying gas pretty indiscriminately right away. And they're yelling, yes, we could. But again, the difference between the people that were marching towards the city center when we were there, that were all mostly wearing white, and then the actual Gen Z that was pretty, I think they got there beforehand. and after her, and the state after as well.
Also, Claudia Sheinbaum wasn't in Mexico City or in the presidential White House, you would call it, or the Mexican White House there. Where was she at?
Right now she's in Tabasco.
Which is
And we'll play what I'll translate what she said.
narcos state within Mexico, but I guess she feels safe there.
Yes. And from David Wolf, riot police were brought in. The order was given to empty the Zócalo and block access to it. And again, you can see there how blocked off it actually was, how difficult it was for people to get in. People were eventually able to get in.
Well, and I will say this, and I have been saying this same thing the last few episodes we had because we knew this was coming up. Claudia Sheinbaum has been doing very well with the tariff negotiations. She's been doing everything in her power to get the best negotiations. I did not want to see these riots get extremely violent, especially to the point where the government maybe lost control and it could possibly derail the tariff negotiations. Yes, they did get violent and made for some good news clips, but I think overall the government did keep control, and I don't think it's going to derail the tariff negotiations, although I do think it's going to really allowed the U.S. to apply pressure to say you need to cooperate with the U.S. military and let us in. And I think the tariff negotiation is going to be really dependent on cooperation with the U.S. military to go after cartels now.
And again, there was a mix of people there, and people did, and even at least I saw instigators that were very clearly not a part of the peaceful people that were just marching there. Again, it still has to be clarified where and who they came from, but clearly not coming with the people that were initially marching. And the people start yelling, "Go away, instigators." That's what they're yelling. They're saying, "You don't belong here. We don't want you here."
Yeah, it was almost like two different groups, the group that was walking and then the people that were in the town square. Mm-hmm. Some people may have just they weren't actually in the march. They might have come from different directions and rallied in the town square knowing there was going to be violence and intentionally causing that violence.
Mm-hmm. But again, I do think a lot of the people that ended up tearing down the barricades, etc., were there genuinely for the protests beforehand and were just fed up. And
yeah, and I mean, this is a real issue. The cartels have massive control over a lot of the government here, and there is a big portion of the population that either want the U.S. to come in or the government to take care of it. But I think whatever way it kind of ends, you're going to have a problem on your hands with whoever's controlling political power.
Mm-hmm. And people are also genuinely fed up. And the fact that from the presidential chair, Claudia Sheinbaum continues to say that these are all bots, as she calls them, or far right or conservatives, because here they use the word conservative as an insult. Again, we did ask people that were there, and all of them told us that they had no real political ideology or political backing behind it. And we did see also kind of a more heartwarming clip where a police officer actually took one of the flags and started telling people that they also they were supportive of the people, but it didn't last too long. But there we see police trying to keep the peace and say, yes, even though I'm here, I understand why you're angry.
Well, it's also a way to cool down tensions in the crowd somewhat.
However, tensions were not completely cooled because we did see...
And I think there was other riots in other parts of Mexico as well.
Yes. So here we see, for example, in Guadalajara, people were actually able to go into their presidential palace and they got sprayed with gas, but they did reach the door, at least.
Well, and maybe we should talk about what happened in the last elections. How many politicians lost their life? Over 200, I believe, correct? Mm-hmm. So the big question is now, yeah, there is a big portion of the Mexican people that would vote for somebody that would kind of speak up against this and make this their campaign platform. But the question is, can they survive until an election on that platform, or are they going to lose their head? Mm-hmm. And because there's very, very few politicians out actually that got the balls to speak out against it.
But people are genuinely that would be that is the winning issue. People are genuinely fed up. And again, I do think a lot of these people
So, I mean, one way
We're
you
genuinely there protesting.
I mean, if you want to speak up against it, maybe you're going to have to live outside of Mexico to speak up against it, but then nobody's going to trust you. You're going to look like a puppet running for president. And I honestly, I can see both sides of it. Like, yes, it got violent, but I think a lot of the people that were protesting weren't violent, and the people that went to the square intentionally went to do that, and there could have been foreign governments involved in that as well.
And the problem here in Mexico is that government repression of protests, especially younger people protests, like back in the 2nd of October, we remember some students that lost their lives because technically the government ordered them to be decimated as they were protesting. So we have that in the back of our minds. That is still within the national consciousness that could happen. That was back in the 70s, 80s.
Also, the slogan of Claudia Sheinbaum and the party that's in power is hugs, not bullets, and they've stuck to that. And so if somebody's going to campaign in the next election, they're going to have to go directly at her with this. This is an issue that would be the issue that could really catalyze a new party to victory. Yeah, I mean, you can see a new party coming out of nowhere because the old parties are so entrenched in corruption.
And they have all had this same failure, just in different ways.
Yeah.
AMLO and Claudia Sheinbaum started with the hugs, not bullets. And recently, a few days ago, Claudia Sheinbaum also came out with statements saying that it would be against the law to go after the cartels and to actually do something to the people that are involved in these criminal activities, because that would be against their human rights. But then people are frustrated, especially today, because we see how the police acted, again, reminding us of back of the 2nd of October and a bunch of other protests where police have been used to end the lives of protesters without much, forethought. And we see people already on the ground, but continue to be beaten by police. And again, a lot of these attacks by the police seem to be unprovoked or going against people that were already trying to go away. That guy's already passed out, and the police continue to hit him in the head. So Claudia has to answer for that and say, why does she not protect the lives of her own citizens, but she protects the lives of those in the cartels?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what politicians actually speak up against this. And I don't think Sheinbaum's going to have to do much. I think the cartels will come after the politicians that speak up. And I think that will create fear in future politicians. And that's how they're going to want to squash this issue. That's the most likely outcome for this, I would think.
And we have more, again, of police just completely hitting people and using probably rubber bullets and gas on protesters that were already on the ground, that were already taken down, and not trying to move them away to protect their safety. And that, again, comes from orders from above, from the fear that Claudia Sheinbaum had even before this started by blockading the Zócalo and blockading all of the streets that lead there, because she knew what could happen. People were trying to compare it to what happened in Nepal, and they were trying to say this might happen because people are just that fed up. But to see the reaction from the police in this way...
There wasn't enough, honestly. I mean, yeah, you're going to see, I think you're going to see a lot of analysis on other channels that weren't at the protest. Like, this wasn't a very big protest compared to other protests we've been to, and the lead up to it wasn't very violent. It got violent at the end from people that really weren't even in the march. Mm-hmm. It seemed like
some of them were, but again, there was a mix of agitators and really fed up people, younger people, that were the ones that started it as well, tearing down the barricades. Again, I do think it's a mix of maybe instigators started doing it and then people just continued, because there was that very clear distinction between the ones that were masked and the ones that weren't.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. was involved with instigators, especially with the Venezuela thing on the back burner right there. They're wanting to put a lot of pressure on Maduro. They also want to put a lot of pressure on the Mexican government and Claudia Sheinbaum herself to cooperate with the U.S. military. If Claudia Sheinbaum does end up cooperating with the U.S. military, it's going to she has a much easier path to do that now because so much pressure is now being applied.
And ZZ Animal says, look at all the cameras, everyone is recording it. And that is why we have seen a lot of these clips emerging right away, even people live streaming from what devolved into the riots. Again, we unfortunately weren't there to record it, but it has been recorded. All the police abuses have been recorded. And the people that tore down the barricades and those that continued it were also recorded.
Well, it's going to be very interesting what happens over the next month. What's Claudia Sheinbaum's move? What's the cartel's move? What's the U.S.'s move?
What's the opposition's move? What's the people that wanted to plan the march?
Not just the opposition, individual politicians. How are they going to benefit? Who's actually going to speak up against it? Is there going to be any repercussions for them? What's going to happen with Venezuela now that all this pressure has been applied on Mexico as well?
And Walker, hi Walker, how are you?
Sorry if we're extremely tired today. We've been going since 7
We don't
a.m.
make a lot of sense right now. We will continue to talk about this on Monday and the coming days. And again, there will be recorded video as well.
And I usually
explaining the situation.
I usually also take a nap in the afternoon, and today we had to go from one event to the other event. And that first event we were just at, and we were showing the clips from that. We must have walked
protest.
5 or 6, 7 miles.
Yes,
because
under the sun.
we were walking, interviewing people, and then you're going back and forth looking for people to interview.
Yes. Walker says, have riot police used rubber bullets? Well, officially, the police of Mexico City have released a statement saying they didn't even use tear gas, which clearly in all the videos we can see. And there are also clips of people reacting to the tear gas. And at the end, we have a clip of a young little girl that was sprayed with tear gas. So were they using rubber bullets? We do have to wait until the people that were there speak up and talk about the abuses from the police. And if they weren't justified, clearly, because this came directly as an order to do whatever they could to go against the protesters.
I don't know, like they had obviously used tear gas. It's worse for them if they deny it and they said there is no tear gas, there was no rubber bullets. Just admit it. I mean, the protesters were there at the palace. They tore down the barricades and they were tearing out windows. So, I mean, you can justify a certain amount of violence. The
thing is, the people at this point in Mexico, especially the ones that went to the protests or that support the protests, will not take that answer lightly. They won't find a justification in this right after Claudia Sheinbaum said, oh, we're not going to go try to, get all the cartels because it goes against their human rights. And then we see police beating people down, beating people that are already down, probably passed out from the initial beating. It's unjustifiable at that point.
Well, okay, so let me pose you a question then. So on January 6th, when they started rushing into the White House, would the police be justified in defending it at that point?
No, but I would say, for example, in Canada, when that lady was trampled, it's as if then riot police would go and kick her after she's down.
No, but it's different if it's just police beating people in the street. It's completely different when it's the National Palace and they're actually ripping out windows and about to enter. I would say it's similar. It's very, very similar to what happened on January 6th. And then a certain amount of violence is acceptable to kind of protect the National Palace, I would think. I think if you take the National Palace out of it and that wasn't the main square and it happened during the march, then I would say it was completely unjustifiable. Yes. But in a way, you're going to be able to justify both sides of the violence.
Yes, but again, then why deny it? Like so that's the thing. That's the behavior.
I think it was the misstep. I think they had pre-planned this to say we hadn't used violence, and then that's going to kind of backfire because all the videos are out there. So them lying about it is really going to turn the narrative kind of against them. If they would have just said, this is the National Palace, we're here to defend it, we were going to defend it. We didn't use unreasonable force. We used the minimal amount of force to protect the palace. That would have been a better line than we didn't use tear gas and the whole world's seeing you use tear gas. And if you're using tear gas with snipers on the roof, the odds are you use rubber bullets as well.
And again, it was that initial instigation of the police that got them fired up in that way. But then what were the orders given to the police? What was the indication and how far were they allowed to go?
Well, I don't think any violence, I don't know any violence, but I don't think the violence started happening until the barriers were ripped down and there was multiple sets of barriers. So at that point, if the protesters are getting through the final barriers and we've seen they're ripping out windows of the palace, I'm going to say that you have the right to defend the palace.
And Walker says there was a queen so tiny she hid in the palace. I saw a
Not
sign
that I want to agree
he
with.
said I saw a sign that said that right now she's hiding in Tabasco, which is a different state of Mexico, pretty far away from Mexico.
Not that I necessarily like Sheinbaum. I don't at all. I'm a conservative, and I don't like her crazy policies. But it was the National Palace, and I mean, a lot of protesters didn't go to the town square.
Yes, again, when
People
we
know
see,
what's going to happen. What in the town square?
and we see that difference between people that were wearing white, the ones we were able to film, interview, etc., and then what got to the town square.
Well,
Is it a great example of the frustration that people are feeling and how the government has completely dissolved itself into this chaos and hasn't done anything to avoid it, instead just trying to both deny it and then paint it towards different sectors of society that didn't even have anything to do with it, like the conservatives, etc. Yes, I mean, in an international lens, this looks really bad for the Mexican government and actually shows the frustration of the people. So in that way, it was effective, in my opinion.
This is also the excuse. If she did want to bring the U.S. and cooperate, she now has an excuse to do that. But I will say, you know what? We were walking in the protest. We walked 45 minutes. There was very, very little police presence there, and there was no violence there.
So again, was it planned by the government?
All the police were obviously stationed. All the police and military were stationed at the National Palace to protect the National Palace, which is somewhat reasonable.
But
she could have put a heavier police presence on the march and then instigated violence into that march, but that didn't happen. There was no police presence there.
But again, was there police presence there, and were they waiting for instigation because the instigators were planted there by the government to make the march seem a lot more violent than it actually was? So now that she can call out the violence and say, it's all them, it's all their fault. They are the ones that are trying to, take the country down.
Well, I think we're in conspiracy theory territory.
Yes.
It's definitely, I don't think this was the actual authentic people. I think it was agitators put there probably by the U.S. or agitators put there by Claudia Sheinbaum, one of the two, because it was just violence that kind of came out of nowhere, only at the square. Everything leading up was very peaceful. There were no police there. So my bet is either the U.S. Had agitators there, or Claudia Sheinbaum had agitators there.
Like, that's clearly agitators, for example.
Based upon what their next move is. So we're going to see over the next couple...
And they took a policeman down.
We'll see over the next few days.
I don't think we can play it for too long on YouTube, but again, which side are they on? Who did they come from? The U.S., Claudia, the actual protests, etc. That has to be clarified, but it won't. And unfortunately also, I mean, we did show the clips of when we were there. It was completely peaceful. People were wearing white. They were just chanting, "Go away, lemon tits."
And the police were nice, on the march, because they were lifting up, what do you call it? Tape for me.
Yeah.
For me to go under.
So we could go under, like, tape just to, as we were walking back.
Mentioning to you, I said, oh, that was a very nice police officer.
Yeah. But unfortunately, again, international independent media and just media in general are just taking the more violent parts of the protest and painting it as this is what's happening. Again, it is useful to show how Claudia Sheinbaum has lost complete control of Mexico, and she's not able. I mean, this is not a good look for the government internationally, but then nationally, again, there was a very actually peaceful protest, and then
let's talk about this. What happened with January 6th? The government went extremely hard at everybody that was there. If nothing happens to anybody that was at the violent end of this protest, then you have to think these agitators were placed there by Sheinbaum.
Mm-hmm. And there are also clips from the night before that show that there were tents, camping tents, on the other side of this barricade, close to the National Palace. And who was staying there? Why were they there? Who was waiting, literally laying in wait of something to happen a day before the protest, 2 days before the protest as well?
Yeah, the violence at the end looked well planned. Now, was it well planned on both sides? The police were obviously going to be at the palace to defend the palace. So I don't know, but why don't we go into the second half of the day when we went to...
we're going to leave that for Monday. I just wanted to talk about the protests.
Okay.
I made this about the protests, but I do want to try translate what Claudia Sheinbaum from Tabasco was saying earlier today about the protest. This might take a little while just for me to translate it as we go. But
Well, and before we go into this, over the next few days, I really want to see what Lily Tejas says, Eduardo Verástegui, other major politicians that may take a run on the next election. What side are they going to come down on this? Because now's the time. Now's the time. If you're going to make this your platform, now is the best time to make this your platform.
Por eso hoy que hubo una manifestación ahí en la Ciudad de México,
And that is why today there was a little protest there in Mexico City,
donde dicen que marcharon jóvenes, pero en realidad había muy pocos jóvenes.
where they say that a lot of young people went, but I didn't see that many young people there.
Y que de manera violenta quitaron unas vallas
And that violently they tore down some of those barricades.
y rompieron vidrios.
And they broke
Decimos
glass.
no a la violencia.
We say no to violence.
Si uno no está de acuerdo, hay que manifestarse de manera pacífica.
If somebody doesn't agree, you have to protest in a peaceful manner.
Nunca hay que utilizar la violencia
We should never use violence
para cambiar.
to change
Siempre
things.
por la vía pacífica.
But the cartels use
Always
violence.
in a very
But the cartels
specific
use
way.
violence all the time.
Exactly. The protest was because the country is dominated by violence and because the government has not done anything, both hers and all the ones that preceded her. So, again, that is the response from the president, who is, again, somewhere very, very far away doing God knows what. Walker says there were no shock groups from the Sheinbaum Antifas or something like that. Again, from the pre-planning of the protest, I did receive from my Spanish channel, a subscriber told me that he was within the organizer groups and within the discords and the chats that they were having. And people that were considered too conservative were being taken out of the chat. And then a lot of ideas were being floated around about ways to instigate, about ways to turn it towards more of a communist, pro-Palestine, etc. There were a lot of ideas floating around. There was not a lot of organization. And I do think that, for example, that black bloc that we showed, or that group of people that even the protesters that were marching towards the city center were yelling at them and saying, those are instigators, take them out, they don't belong here. And they clearly looked very different. And again, we do see within the Zócalo, once people got there and started to do violence, they did not look like the protesters
Not a lot
that
of
we
citizens came out. This wasn't a huge protest compared to other protests, and not a lot of nobody really stayed.
I mean, it was big compared to protests elsewhere.
And nobody stayed to the end. It was a different group of protesters in the city square there, and it's obviously two groups had the most to gain from this, and it wasn't the citizens, because if it was the citizens, the march would have been much bigger in the first place. The two people that had the most to gain would either be the U.S. or the Mexican government and Claudia Sheinbaum. So as far as the violence goes at the end. So I think it's one of those two that are responsible for it. Who knows which one?
Mm-hmm. But I will say, again, within an international lens and context, it looks very good for the opposition, or it looks very good for the people that are frustrated and for the U.S. to point and say, look, Claudia Sheinbaum has completely lost control of Mexico. Now we have to go in and do something. The people are frustrated. They're actually asking, the Mexican people are asking for something to be done, and they're willing to do all this.
No. Okay, you're making that side and that argument. I'll make the argument for Sheinbaum. Sheinbaum has a ton to gain from this.
Well, yes, if she says that these were all...
Look what's happening in the EU. Look what's happening in Canada. Look what's happening in every other Western country. A ton of online censorship, digital ID. They want to start tracking people. They're banning and debanking other political parties like the AfD in Germany. Something similar she would now have the power to do here. Mm-hmm. She didn't have the excuse to do that. So going forward in the next few months, if she starts talking about bringing mass censorship bills and debanking people,
these people are dangerous.
These people are dangerous, and actually going after them online with a lot of online censorship, then I would say she's the one responsible for this. But if all the pressure is put on by the U.S. for Sheinbaum to cooperate with the U.S., then I would say the U.S. is responsible. The actions that happen over the next month or two will really dictate who was actually responsible for the violent actions in this protest, because in my opinion, it wasn't the people.
No.
It was,
And it wasn't the people that we saw while we were there for the actual march. That was like the people gave a time
this was
and
an
a date to be
organized,
there.
this was seemed like an organized group of violent people at the end, and they were sent there by somebody. So-
And unfortunately, again, we have that vantage point that we are here in Mexico. I am from Mexico. I am Mexican. We have the vantage point that a lot of other independent journalists I haven't seen, like Alex Jones, etc. They're all focusing on the violence and what this means and the frustration of the people. And see, even the Mexican people are frustrated by it. But again, there is a lot more context behind it that they are either not saying or they're not aware of. And I think that it is important to give that context because, again, this might not be a good thing for the citizens of Mexico that are actually frustrated with the violence because, again, both Sheinbaum can point to, if they are her agitators, or at least some of them, can point to, well, now we have to censor more and track these violent people. Again, if it was the U.S., they can point and say, well, this is an opportunity for us to go in because of the violence and the people are being frustrated, it's getting out of hand, etc. So all of that is also important. And then the whole context of opposition parties and other people being able to also capitalize on this movement,
Yeah,
which
honestly,
might not
I think
also be good.
I think it's less about what happened today and what happens
Yes.
over the next month. Who's applying pressure for what reasons, and who's actually taking action that's materializing in the real world, like online censorship or massive pressure on the Mexican government to let the U.S. military in.
And unfortunately, here in Mexico, we have a very short-term memory about things that happen and that frustrate us. But this protest will be forgotten by next week, probably, when something happens. I mean, we had a massive theft of petroleum and nobody remembers that. We have giant cases of corruption. Nobody remembers that. And we're very forgetful people. So something happens, a protest happens, we'll talk about it for a week, then something else will happen. And the intrigue and the question and the mystery around who instigated for what and what's behind it, what's the purpose behind the violence that we saw and that got reported everywhere will be completely forgotten by then. And nobody will continue to try to investigate it.
And then the other question is, who's going to be the U.S. The U.S. is going to try to have a puppet candidate in the next election, and who's going to be that candidate? Because over the next month, and based upon what is said about this protest, I think a couple of candidates may emerge.
But also, here in Mexico, our presidential terms are 6 years. So the U.S. presidential term will end even a little bit before we have our presidential elections here. So again, somebody could be put in there, but they might not be able to be watched over if the administration changes to the Democrats.
I've watched a lot of U.S. Generals and people planning if the U.S. came into Mexico with the Mexican government's help, how would they actually do that? And the thing is, they would pick one or two cartels and they would consolidate power amongst those one or two cartels and then roll them up into the legitimized government.
So more of the same.
Who's going to be which cartel is going to win? Who's the U.S. going to actually cooperate with? Because they're just not going to come here guns ablaze, and they're going to want cooperation from one of the cartels on the ground, I would think.
Walker says, it's funny how leftists who are always saying violence is a midwife of history are now all about love and peace. And Jessica Ramirez, hi Jessica Ramirez, how are you? She says, Nat imitates Sheinbaum very well. Not proud of it, but thank you. I wish I didn't
Maybe
have that
let's
ability.
just talk a little bit about Eduardo Verástegui.
Eduardo Verástegui.
Yeah, so we went to his little conference today.
Yes, so he got in a fight a few weeks ago with Javier Milei. Originally, Eduardo Verástegui was the leader of CPAC here in Mexico. We went to it last year. It was still CPAC. Then Eduardo Verástegui said something against Milei, and because of connections, CPAC got canceled. There were some phone calls made, and Eduardo Verástegui had to scramble to come up with a new conference, completely different, in a different location, called Cumbre Viva Mexico, and we were able to go to the the end of it.
Yeah, all the big speakers we got to see. And I will say this, man, it was like the speakers that were up there, so you had some Christian nationalists, but people were really speaking there from their mind and their heart. And I would say they very good speakers. I was actually, it was leading up to Eduardo Verástegui getting on stage and having his Donald Trump moment. That's what I was expecting. He was just canceled by Milei. His conference was canceled by Milei. Plus, you had the major events happening with Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City and the riots. This was
on the same day.
This was his opportunity to have his Donald Trump moment and really plant his flag and be the new conservative leader. And man, he just shit the bed. I wanted to like him. I wanted him to have his moment, and he just didn't do it. He got up there with his iPad and he read a pre-canned speech, literally constantly looking down at the iPad. And then at the very end, he would say, "Viva this person, viva that person, viva this person." And there was a list of maybe 6 or 7 names he named, but every single time he would have to look down at the iPad to remember the name. And he had these unnatural pauses in. It was almost like he was looking at his iPad and said, "Pause for impact."
And
he
since
would
the
wait a
beginning,
minute.
since the beginning of CPAC, the one we went to last year, I have been mentioning that I don't think he is the right leader, but he has connections with, well, he had, now they don't
And
like him, connections with Donald Trump, with MAGA, with CPAC back in the States. So he was being held up by that infrastructure as well. Again, he does have friends within the people who helped Milei win, who are now angry at Milei. They spoke also at the conference. They spoke very well. But for him, I think he's taking too much of a safe route. And at the same time, he's trying to look too much the part without actually being the part. And I think the movement, or the whatever you want to call it, conservatism, the right in Mexico, needs someone else to lead it, but also stop looking for leaders and just start consolidating, stop waiting for the leader to appear, because the leaders that we have,
Well, also you're seeing the split with Donald Trump and the conservatives in the States. You're seeing Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon really say, "We want America first." What you're doing is you're going down this corporatist path. They want to push Donald Trump in the right direction. Donald Trump doesn't want to seem to go in that direction, but the energy is really with the America first part of the party that's splitting. And the same thing is happening with Milei in Argentina. A lot of his initial supporters are kind of splitting off, saying, "You're having corruption scandals with your Bitcoin. You're not a real nationalist."
you're linked too much to the States. You're linked too much to the same
corporatists.
people, to the corporatists and the same people, the same economists that put us in this mess in the first place.
And it seems like in both countries, the conservative movement that's splitting away from these two really strong leaders that really birthed the populist movement, but the energy is with the people that are splitting away. And it seems like Eduardo Verástegui is getting canceled by Milei, but trying to side with Trump.
Yes.
There's an easy path here.
But he did invite the speakers that spoke completely against that.
He put on a great event.
Yes.
There was great speakers there. Everybody was great there, and everything was set up. It was the perfect day because of everything that happened in Mexico City with the riots, because of what happened in
Mexico in
Milei.
general.
He could have went up there and planted his flag and had a real speech. Instead, he brought his iPad with a speech it seemed like he wrote a week ago. And he just gave that speech, and he was the worst speaker of everybody that went on stage. I'm sorry to say it. I'm going to speak from the heart. I'm going to speak the truth. And he played his damn song that I don't like.
His cumbia.
It's not necessarily the song that I don't like, but the music video is so polished. It just makes you seem like an elitist.
Because he wants to be very polished. And I also think that is why he did not mention anything that happened in Mexico City today, because he understands that he has to wait and really figure out who was behind what and be very, measured in his response to it. And he couldn't do it during the same day, right after what happening.
But it was the opportunity.
It was the opportunity. But that's the thing. That's why he can't be the leader of the movement.
Well, and he's already scared
to.
because of what happened with Milei. Milei's out to cancel him, and rather than get up on stage and and have some balls or some cojones, he let everybody else at the conference speak for him and really have that fighting spirit. A lot of them spoke shit on Milei, and they weren't scared. Yet when he got up there, that was his opportunity. And he needs people that are going to tell him the truth and not exist within this echo chamber, and hopefully he'll realize, but I really don't think he's the candidate at this point.
And I think this is coming out of frustration of knowing and seeing, and as we were at the conference, still looking at the clips and the things that happened after we had left the protest and how it devolved into the violence, how it was a great opportunity to speak on it, and then the frustration of him not doing that when he is painting himself as a leader of the new right, the non-cowardly right, la derechita no cobarde, as the Argentinians would say. But then he does exactly the opposite that all the other speakers were able to do. And they were speaking completely against that kind of mentality within the right in Latin America or Hispano-America or whatever you want to call it. So,
well, also like a lot of people are disappointed with the drift of Donald Trump going in as a corporatist and the drift of Milei and the scandals they're involved in, whether it's Trump going after Marjorie Taylor Greene, but supporting
Epstein.
other rhinos, or he's not releasing the Epstein files,
Israel.
or the Bitcoin scandal, or the with Milei, or the scandal with his sister where he's laundering money to her. Like, we still like you. We're still on your side. But if you continue to go down that path, it's not going to end well for you. The populist movement will divide from you. And it seems like Verastegui is not only going down that path, he's just fully in that camp already.
I think he's a little bit too scared, justifiably so, but still. He was the one that a lot of people are looking up to, and I don't think it benefits him in the long run to continue to try to be so polished.
Well,
and it doesn't benefit the entirety of the conservatives or the right in Mexico or in Latin America to continue to try to be, and I saw it again at this conference, and I see it a lot with also commentators, and some are great and some don't go that path, but a lot of commentators on the right here in Mexico and Latin America continue to try to be that very polished with the suit and the hair and look very good and everything is perfectly as it should be. And that is not what worked in the US. That's not what worked with MAGA. That's not how you bring the people into the populist movement.
well, and
you have to be able to relate to the people you're trying to gain support from.
And Verastegui's not big enough to when at the conference, everybody surround him with lights and cameras and this and that. It's like just walk around the conference like a normal person and talk to people, interact, be a man of the people. He just has this natural era of elitism.
And in Mexico in general, that side of the conservatives, more of the traditionalists, the ones that are very focused on just the religious aspect, but not the actual what it means to be the conservative political current, smaller government, etc., that, for example, in the States, it was able to break through, yes, include religion, but also include, number one, other ways of thinking and other ways of looking at things. But number two, being able to not be as polished and not be, the rhino party that everybody wears suits, everybody's so formal, everybody is, straight and
Well,
on the straight and narrow.
he also lives in Miami. So if he lives in Miami and these big riots,
still, but he used to.
These big riots are happening here in Mexico. This is an opportunity for you to take a stand against corruption, against the cartels, and be safe and go back to Miami, but have the stance that no other Mexican politician can have because they're scared of getting their head chopped off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's just frustrating. I think
every speaker was great. Every speaker was really on the edge. Like, they understood politics. They understood what's happening with Trump, what's happening with Milei, and they weren't scared to speak their mind. And it was just leading up to this moment with these riots that were escalating throughout the day for Verastegui to really have a Donald Trump moment of when Donald Trump really sparked populism, but he just didn't have it. He had the opposite of it.
Yes, and some of the great speakers were, for example, Daran, Pablo Muñoz Iturrieta, all the Argentinians basically that were very fed up with Milei, and I think Verastegui brought them in to talk about that.
Those Argentinians could speak. They were great. I didn't even speak the language, but you were translating for me.
Yes.
And they had the crowd going, and I was like, you were telling me some of the stuff they were saying. I was like, man, they're really on the edge there. That was great. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Jessica Ramirez says, sorry, we're speaking really fast. And I know a lot of you speak Spanish and are coming over from my Spanish channel, but I'll try to do it slower. We're just fired up, essentially. Jessica Ramirez says, Verastegui is conservative, but nothing more. Even with the connections, he really didn't know how to take advantage to form a complete right-wing team. And didn't fully understand what the right wing means now and I don't want it to sound like globalism, but in a more global context, what it's evolved into in a lot of these countries that has actually worked against what they used to have before with the conservative parties. Like in Canada, the Conservative Party is essentially the Liberals with a mask on. And yes, there is the People's Party of Canada, but they've been so censored and so taken out of the whole political context that they weren't able to move forward. But they understood at least what was happening in the US, in the UK with, for example, Tommy Robinson and a lot of the other real opposition and the journalists and the people speaking out. And here we don't really have that. And I continue to try to speak about that. But
he talks about a lot about religion, but there's like some people, when they speak about religion, especially there's a lot of good Christian nationalists as well, that when they speak about it, you can really feel it. When Verástegui does it, it almost seems like it's for a political means. Even if it's authentic, it doesn't come off as authentic. It feels like he's trying to make a base. He knows the religious people won't leave him. So he's he's using the talking points rather than taking risks and saying authentic things.
But then he only wants that base, it seems. And Jessica Ramirez says he doesn't know how to form a complete right-wing team that would cover other fronts and not just religion. And I see it a lot here, not just with Verástegui, but again, a lot of these figures that have appeared as maybe leaders or maybe the ones that could lead a more normal right-wing populist movement here in Mexico. I see a lot of them focusing too much on religion and leaning on it a little bit too much, but not understanding that if they just get the religious people, yes, they're supposed to be 80% of Mexicans are religious, but that's not how you actually form what you're trying to form. Yes.
Like a large tent
and get
coalition.
the best ideas either.
Yeah.
And I think it alienates too many people.
All the politicians in Mexico that are conservative seem like rhinos. Republicans in name only from the 80s. They're pro-war. You don't have these populists. But it's very interesting because you would think Verástegui could like step out of that box because he's surrounded by like populist Argentinians and other people from South America and Central America that really know populist politics and really know like
what worked as well.
What's not a rhino.
Yes.
Like they embody what's not a rhino. That's what you want to see in your politicians. He's surrounded by all these people. If he just look at them and say the things that they're saying and really mean it, man, he could have something. But
or pass the mantle onto someone who is willing to, take off the suit and tie, take off the trying to be perfect and polished all the time, and just support him and he can continue doing his conferences and even continue trying to make his party work, which won't work because again, it's just too focused on traditionalism, which is what most people here in Mexico still consider what conservatism is. Here, there's no real understanding of what conservatism as a political current means, what are the ideals, what historically and now as well is being pushed for.
He did absolutely fantastic when he helped finance the Sound of Freedom. Yes. And then that was great. He financed it. Maybe that's what the role he needs to have when it comes to politics. Find the right candidate to put in there, finance them, and be the power player behind the scenes.
But also, again, in Mexico, and I continue to say it, but I think I just say it in Spanish, so I don't say it too much in English. There's too many people trying to form parties, like the opposition party, there's a million of them. They're trying to make these parties work. It's very difficult in Mexico to even get a party started. There's a lot of requisites that you have to be able to fulfill before they even grant you party status, and it takes years to do. But they're all focused on that, and they're all like Ricardo Salinas Pliego, another. People might compare him to Trump because he's this businessman that has continued and started to speak more and more and wanting to go against Morena because Morena has tried to affect him as well. And he is more in a libertarian bent, but also conservative, considered here conservative in Mexico. All of these people are too focused on them wanting to grab power, make their own parties, instead of cooperating with each other and finding who actually could lead something. Because with him, I think he has more correct ideas and he knows how to speak to the people a little better. But at the same time, he is being drowned by his fight with Morena and the government. But as well, he has his network television. There's too many things on his plate.
Why the hell didn't
help each other?
Why the hell didn't he go after Milei? Milei canceled CPAC directly and try to cancel Verástegui. And Verástegui went up there. Everybody else at the conference actually spoke up against Milei and his corruption scandals, except Verástegui, the one guy that was being targeted by Milei, because he's scared of Milei because he doesn't want to offend Donald Trump
and his reputation. He's scared of his reputation.
What would be best for Verástegui is to go with these American first people like Bannon, like Tucker, and sit himself apart because there isn't anybody like that in Mexico.
But they go they strayed too far away from that perfected, polished person that I think a lot of people considered that would be the best for president in Mexico because that's what we see it as, but it's not what's working anymore, especially with Gen Z and the young people.
Well, I was shocked by the Argentinians as well, bringing up Israel and really going hard at Israel. I didn't think that was going to happen, but
because they're frustrated with Milei.
yeah, with their frustrated with Milei.
Yeah.
But again, Verastegui he just plays it as safe as he can.
Yes.
And that's not going to win you an election when you play it as safe as you can.
And
The only way for a
said.
conservative to even have a shot at winning an election here is to go against Sheinbaum and the cartels. And I think there's nobody that's brave enough to do it. Maybe Lily Tellez. Maybe.
But Lili Tellez, we have another party here in Mexico called the PAN, or the National Action Party, that has been considered the more right-wing conservative party. However, their ideals only mix with conservatism when it comes to religion and abortion, for example. But in general, they have very liberal and economically liberal also policies. So it doesn't really fit, and we've never really had a full-on right-wing conservative party or government here in Mexico. There's been, flashes here and there and things like approximated, but if you think the PAN is conservative, and that's what Claudia Sheinbaum says from the presidential podium and uses the word conservative as an insult, if people think the PAN is conservative, then there's no chance in no way that actual conservatism could rise up unless we start educating the people about what it means and how it could benefit and how it is actually different from what we've seen over and over again, because for 200 years, there hasn't really been anything like that.
Well, the PAN is just like a Canadian conservative. They're just a liberal that calls themselves conservative. Although I will say if this thing continues to ramp up with the cartels and all this violence here, as the election comes out and however the U.S. gets involved or doesn't get involved or the Mexican government actually starts doing something, it could be a one issue election where if Lili Tellez stands up against that one thing, it may be enough.
But again, we will be coming out of Claudia Sheinbaum, the first female president of Mexico. I have my own opinions about women being president. Just make your own conclusions.
If she's the only one that has the balls to say anything.
And that's that. That like none of the men have the actual balls. I mean, Ricardo Anaya, but not a lot of people like him either. He's also in the House. Lili Tellez is also in the House, the representatives. But nobody really likes Ricardo Anaya either. And he does go at the current government quite a bit. And he does talk about the cartels. The problem is he already tried to be president once and it didn't work out for him with the PAN. They're both from the PAN.
But I think
people are just, if they try to go and with Lili Tellez and try to go through the PAN, the National Action Party, people have like flashbacks and PTSD from the PAN, especially the ones that are looking for a movement that more closely resembles what we see in the other rights in the other parts of the world.
But I will say this, if the U.S. does get involved and you replace the cartels with the U.S., they're going to be in every little part of your business. Everything will be taxed. You're going to be trading one devil for another. So there's no way for Mexico to really break free from the U.S. or the cartels. It seems at this point you're going to have one or the other.
Or its own political system. I mean, we have millions of parties that have arisen, that have died, that have come back again. And everybody, it's not like in the US where if you're a Republican, it's really rare, or a Democrat, that you'll cross over and go to the other party. Here, everybody goes to different parties. Morena is essentially constituted of all the other parties that weren't radical enough. A lot of people moved over to Morena and with AMLO when they saw that there was a chance. So the way the political system in itself works here, and the corruption within it as well, is very different and hard to understand if you're not seeing it and living it day to day and know the histories of a lot of these legislators and politicians that have been all over the map with ideology and party and etc. And like Walker says, he says, I saw a proposal from the protest march that said remove all political parties from Mexico. And I think that would be the best thing. And that is what would be necessary. Again, you have to reform and completely tear down and bring up again the entire system of politics in Mexico, because otherwise the corruption will continue to be there, as we see over and over again.
Yeah, and it'll also be interesting. Yeah, we'll just kind of leave it there, I guess.
What were you going to say?
You also have that third possibility where one cartel kind of consolidates power and then rolls up to the government and actually legitimizes themselves. This happened in Russia with the KGB. So at that point, when that happens, if there's too much pressure coming from the United States, a very likely outcome could be one cartel consolidates power and then rolls themselves into the government, realizing the only way to fight off the United States would be to actually get into legitimate politics and legitimize the country overall.
Because, I mean, that has happened here and there with some governors with ties as well that the U.S. has discovered, and with just the obviousness of it from the people that we see what happens in the government. But it would be a bit more clear, I guess, or further into to grasp further power, actual political power.
Yeah, it depends on how much pressure the United States is actually going to apply.
And also, again, we were talking yesterday on Friday on our live yesterday about the possibility of something soon happening in Venezuela, and also what the context of this protest, and now that we saw what actually happened during the protest, what that could mean for Venezuela, the US, and the plans that they have. Maybe Venezuela is just a dress rehearsal for Mexico, and we have toyed around with that idea.
I wouldn't be surprised if I woke up in the morning and the strike had been had in Venezuela, or Maduro had stepped down by the end of this weekend. I had theorized that if the protests in Mexico got violent, that there was very likely going to be a strike in Venezuela. I won't be surprised if it happens by Monday.
So we'll have to wait and see for that one.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, we were extremely tired today. We were a little bit off.
All over the place. And also frustrated from both events. But I mean, interesting. We did want to, at least I did want to give a little bit more context to maybe American viewers or people in English that see like the violence that's happening, but didn't see or getting the full context of what's happening in Mexico for real. Yeah. And what has been happening for decades.
And also realize, the protests did get violent, but the country stayed together, and they're getting really close to a tariff deal. And so far, Sheinbaum's doing a good job with that, at least. So hopefully that continues.
And
because the future of Mexico is going to depend on that tariff deal. That tariff deal, like even what AMLO did with the 2 ports before, this tariff deal would dictate if that project becomes really successful.
And we will continue to investigate throughout tomorrow and Monday what more information comes out about these protests, us trying to also figure out the instigators, what the president says, what the organizers or who the organizers even were, and what the general Mexican public thinks about it. And we'll continue to talk about it on Monday.
I will say one more thing. She has consolidated the courts, so she technically should have the power now that these violent protests kind of broke out to implement mass censorship and a lot of other things. But if she doesn't do that, that's going to lead me to believe that it wasn't her that implicated all this violence, that it was probably the U.S. But if she does, then it's going to point to her.
And again, like the Supreme Court is dominated by the current party and government. There are no checks and balances here in Mexico. And we have seen this push for censorship and further, grasping of more and more power. That's what happens with socialist communist governments, and we'll continue to talk about that as well. Thank you so much to Walker, Jessica Ramirez, and ZZ Animal for your comments and for joining us today. If you're watching it on a replay, please don't forget to subscribe. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers here on our English channel. We also have a Spanish channel where I speak in Spanish, and I will talk about this. I'll probably do a stream in Spanish tomorrow about it, and then on Monday as well, we have a guest to talk about what's happening now here in Mexico. But have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you on Monday or tomorrow if you speak Spanish.
Adios.